You're tuning in to Missouri NEA Connects, a podcast to focus on all things Missouri education, from policy to practice, so that each of us can unite, inspire, and lead from where we are. We're happy you're here. I'm just excited to be here. We're going to look at pillars in the next 4 episodes. We're going to look at each of the pillars, each of the 4 pillars. We're going to go dive deep into each of them. Today is praise, but I did want to give an overview of the pillars again, just as a refresh from the last episode at the end where Christi, you dove into the pillars just a tad bit. So can you give us Jenn or Christi, can you give us an overview of the pillars again, just as a refresh, and then we'll start talking about praise.
All right. So the pillars of prosocial education are inductive discipline, which is really explaining to students how and why we want them to behave certain ways, so that they can really internalize what they should be doing and how to do that. We are using praise, which is just a social reward to encourage and promote the positive or prosocial behaviors that we're looking for in the classroom, that reinforces those behaviors and draws attention to more positive aspects of the classroom instead of focusing on so many reprimands. Then we also have teacher-student relationships, and we're talking about developing really strong relationships that are based on respect and trust, where students feel comfortable in coming to class, sharing their ideas, having conversations, and not worried about being judged or harshly treated and punished by their teachers. And then our final pillar is the emotionally upbeat classroom. And really, that is creating a positive, warm climate. It builds on the other pillars. Whenever you're doing all of those others, you really do create an emotionally upbeat classroom. But it is, again, a space where students are in a more positive mindset, which opens up the opportunity for more learning and critical thinking and problem solving to happen. And just being really intentional about establishing that learning environment in a way that will promote good quality learning, collaboration, and active participation in class.
Awesome. Thank you for giving that overview. Just a refresh, when we're looking at prosocial education, looking at these 4 pillars, the first pillar is praise. So Christi, can you give us a definition of what praise is, and then maybe just a tad of the research surrounding that?
Sure. So praise is any kind of affirmation that you give to a child for their behavior. So it doesn't even have to be verbal. It can be, a thumbs up, just a nod, anything that says that was well done. And as far as the research behind it goes, there's been research back to the 1920s on the power of reinforcement. Praise is a reinforcer for behavior. So that goes all the way back to like Skinner, and his group. But more recently, in 2021, the U.S. Department of Education put out a report that said praise is one of the top 5 most effective strategies for reducing common behavior problems in schools. It's free, it's easy, doesn't take any time away from, your curriculum. So it's one of those things we should all be doing. We don't necessarily do it well. So one of the things that we focus on in prosocial ed programs is how to provide praise more effectively to increase prosocial behavior.
Thank you. That's crazy that it's top 5. Whoa. And it's something that's so seamless. I feel like totally one of those underutilized strategies that every educator hears about in educator prep, but I really love the way that you all are putting it together with social, and we're having it all work together. So what does it look like? And you mentioned a few examples, like it could be a thumbs up, it could be like a nod, it could be whatever a teacher does to show a student, I see you and I appreciate what you just did. But what does it look like in a classroom, specifically in a prosocial classroom? So maybe some examples you give during training as an example.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really hone in on in training is starting with a "you are" statement and helping the teachers to apply the character traits that they're looking for in their classrooms to that statement. So the praise doesn't have to be anything extensive. It can be something as simple as, you are so responsible. You're such a kind person. Not only is that praising the prosocial behavior that we're looking for, but it also helps the student to have a better self-image, because they do tend to believe what the adults in their lives tell them about them. So whenever we can say things like, you are so kind, I appreciate your honesty, you are such an honest student, those kinds of things, it really helps to promote the positive prosocial behavior that we're looking for, and then B, it really helps the child to internalize a more positive self-image. Also, whenever we say that out loud, it can communicate to some of the other students in the classroom that you believe that this child is responsible, trustworthy, honest, all of the prosocial characteristics that we're looking for.
So not only is it supporting the student's self-efficacy and then building their belief in themselves as that kind person, but it's also like an endorsement from the teacher in the classroom that's recognizing that and saying to the other students, Johnny is kind. Johnny is a kind person because of whatever reason. I really like those that you are strategy. Very helpful. I love sentence stems. I taught those often as an English teacher, so always love a good sentence stem. Do you have an example of something like that happened in what's an example from a classroom that you've seen a teacher use this really well?
Yeah. So we had a middle school teacher that just was really struggling with a young man that was blurting out and making odd noises in class just frequently, just at random times. It was distracting during her teaching. It was distracting the other students during their learning time. And she came to us and she's like, I'm just really struggling. I don't know what to do. No matter how many times I get on to him or tell him that this is, not appropriate behavior, it doesn't seem to matter. It's not making any difference. And so we asked her to think about one positive thing that she could say about him. And it was interesting to see her really struggle with coming up with the one positive thing to say about this child. And so we started asking just some more questions to try and help her consider what the one positive thing might be. And as we were asking questions about the child, we found that he had had a pretty difficult home life, that he was primarily living with his grandparents. His parents were in and out of his life, in and out of prison. And during this time as a small child, he discovered that making these odd noises was the one way to get attention. And so that behavior was learned from a very small age, that if he made weird noises, he was going to get attention from grandma, get attention from his parents. It was negative attention, but it was attention, needless to say. So that behavior carried over into school and continued to escalate as he got a little older, and was just becoming problematic. To the point where the teacher, he decided in middle school that he was going to try and play basketball. The teacher even had a conversation with the basketball coach to try and get him to help assist with stopping these noisy behaviors. And the basketball coach had him, doing extra laps and whatnot until he ended up quitting the team, which then made the problem even worse. And so we really did get the teacher to work really hard to say one positive thing about this young man. She said the one positive thing, and each day we encouraged her to look for one positive thing to say to him. You're such a kind person. You're so responsible, whatever it was. And sometimes she had to repeat the same thing from one day to the next because she couldn't find something new to say that day. But slowly but surely, she started to notice that his relationship with her was starting to turn around. And then she also started noticing that some of the students would say, well, the teacher down the hallway talks badly about him, or I've heard the teachers talking the coaches and stuff talking about him or whatever. So the kids were even picking up on some of the other teachers were saying negative things about the child, even though the teachers thought that they were saying this to other adults in the room. and the kids didn't really know that that was going on. So the teacher persisted and continued to say positive things, not only around the students, but then she also started saying positive things about him around the other teachers and standing up for him. And she did start to notice that the noises, the unwanted noises in the classroom started to decline, and the child started performing in the classroom, doing some of the things that she was asking more frequently with less hesitancy. There was, and it was all just because she was saying a handful of nice things, one nice thing every single day to a child that desperately wanted attention. And the only way he knew how to get it was from negative attention. So
That's incredible. I'm thinking about some students that I've had in the past and how I wish I would have been more persistent with the praise now. Christi, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to build on that. So the example that Jenn gave was with a child that was challenging. Praise works for every kid. They're all responsive to it. Who doesn't like somebody who notices something good about you, right? But it is often the case that the children that are the most challenging for us are the ones that respond most dramatically to this. There was actually a study done in middle schools where they went in for a couple of months and worked on increasing the praise to reprimand ratio. So when they began at baseline, the praise to reprimand ratio varied from 1 to 4 to 1 to 9. So that is 1 act of praise for every 4 to 9 acts of reprimand in the classroom, and that's normal. That's most of us as adults focus more on correcting children's behavior than praising them for their good behavior. So over a 2-month period, they worked with the teachers. At the end of that 2 months, they were able to get a lot of teachers down to a 1-to-1 ratio, a few even to a 1-to-0 ratio. And what they found was that there was greater on-task behavior for all the kids, but especially for the children who are at risk for emotional and behavioral disorders. And those challenging students, on average, increased from a grade of D to a grade of C. And for the teachers who got to a 1-to-0 ratio, it went from an average of D to an average B grade for those kids. So praise is effective for everybody, but it's more dramatic even for challenging students.
Thank you for that. That's incredible. If you could send me that, I can also put that, any of that research, I can put that in the chat or in the description. That would be awesome. So we're seeing praise is helping all students, no matter where they are in their journey. And also, if whatever powers that be measure student success by student outcomes, it is having a positive effect on student outcomes academically, and also, more importantly, for them as a human being. Again, feeling that I am seen, I am heard, I am respected in this space, is really cool to see.
could I add also to that? So those are some of the positive impacts that we see for students. But I will say that we also see some tremendous impacts on teachers as well. Um, Teachers sometimes are put into systems where they're having to spend a lot of extra time tracking behavior, rewarding behavior, tracking the rewards that are being offered and whatnot. And that tends to put a lot of stress and strain and additional tasks on teachers to try and keep up with and monitor. Praise is also something that is free, so it doesn't cost them anything. You're not having to go out and buy little candy bars or trinkets or trophies or anything like that to supply your class with the reward that a lot of teachers are handing out. And so this really does replaces those and is way more effective in helping to increase prosocial behavior. So we have those that it takes a lot of the strain off of both the pocketbook and the amount of tasks that the teacher has to complete during the day and keep track of. So for teachers, it's also very beneficial to implement praise. It also works to strengthen the teacher-student relationship, which is one of the other pillars that we're going to be talking about. So yeah.
They're all interwoven. Love it. all of the pillars, and the fact that it's beneficial for every stakeholder involved. And it's something that's so simple. It's kind of like back to basics, just being a great human to your fellow human. So I know you said something, you mentioned the you are and then sentence stem that you had started, but what are some tips and tricks that teachers can do today to begin implementing this?
I think there's a couple of things that are a little bit challenging to increase your praise to reprimand ratio. One is that sometimes you have students that are challenging enough, it's hard to find opportunities to catch them being good. And so one of the things that I recommend is you think about those kids outside of the moment. You know, when you have a moment to breathe and reflect on your class a little bit, come up with some things that you admire in those kids. It might be they're a natural leader because they're leading a disruptive group of kids in the class. Or it might be, you know, that they have a great sense of humor and that's the way they're being disruptive. But also sometimes children who have been through a lot of personal trauma become very sensitive to other people's well-being. And you may catch them being really compassionate towards someone else in the classroom. So look for those. What are those strengths? Identify them and plan ahead to find a moment to praise a child for those qualities that you admire in them. So I think that's one trick. Another is to try to become more aware of your own praise level. So a lot of teachers say, good job, good job. And so you have this impression that you're praising kids a lot. But we specifically want you to praise them for prosocial behavior, and we don't actually see very much of that. So one of the things that you could try is the old penny in the pocket trick, you know, where you fill one side of your pocket with pennies and you move it over to the other side every time you praise. So you get a sense of, you know, am I really praising as much as I think I am for prosocial behavior? Another is to keep a roster and just tick it off, you know, so you can see. I had a teacher once tell me she felt like she praised kids all the time. And I said, well, come back in a month after you've collected some data on yourself and tell me how it's going. And she came back and she said, okay, I'm praising the same 3 kids. You know, like I'm not praising everybody. So I'm not finding, you know, the opportunity to bring that to everyone. So those are a couple of tricks. We've even had a teacher who decided to do a praise board on the back of her door and had her students put Post-its up to praise one another. And that classroom just transformed like magic in terms of, you know, the culture of the classroom. It was really lovely.
That's awesome. I love the pennies. Because I don't know what to do with pennies, and now they're going to stop making them. So it would be like a really cool trick to have pennies that you can move back and forth. It's also a relic in the country now. And the praise board on the back of the door for students. I love that. I do love that. Being able to praise each other. Well, what happens if it doesn't work right away? That's always the concern. Teachers always want to, they're always willing to try something, but then obviously doing something once it's not a prescriptive thing where it's going to happen and then magic occurs, that the transformative classroom, like Christi, you just mentioned. So what happens if it doesn't work right away? What are some troubleshooting things that teachers can keep in their back pocket with their pennies so that they're aware, okay, we need to stay the course?
So generally, we find that it works remarkably quickly. In fact, we start our 4 pillars. We start with praise because that is the quickest and easiest way to turn a classroom around. So the one study I talked to you about, it was 8 to 10 weeks, 2 months roughly. And then another study that a doctoral student myself did, it was 7 weeks. And we got measurable change in prosocial behavior. So I haven't seen it not work. And I've seen it work really quite quickly. However, as I said, we are focused on effective praise, and there are ways to do it that are more effective than others. And Jenn outlined those for us. So it needs to be about prosocial behavior. You're praising what it is you want to see increase. It needs to be specific. I saw you helping Zach find his vocab words. You are a helper. It needs to be person-focused. That "you are" clause is really important. We even created a poster for teachers of phrases you can use following that "you are," so we can send you one of those if you want. And then it also, the more public it is, the better. So if other kids around you hear you praising the child, it does two things. One, it gets the kids who are listening start imitating that behavior because they want the praise too. And the other thing is it transforms the way they think about their classmate who's being praised. So, Jenn talked about the child who got a lot of reprimands and not very much praise. And then when that started to change, it changes the way other kids. So sometimes when you have a child that you're like worried about because they're rejected by other kids or neglected in your classroom, this is your powerhouse strategy for helping them be more admired and more accepted by their classmates, is to point out their strengths and the qualities that you admire in them, out loud, and so the other kids can hear.
I would say, to kind of add on to all of these things as well, helping teachers to let go of trying to stop every single unwanted behavior. Like, our minds go to trying to immediately put a stop or an end to everything, which leads to a lot of reprimands in some cases. So I try and tell teachers, obviously, if a child is bleeding or harming themselves or others, then we do definitely need to stop that. But if it's a pencil tap or something along those lines, doing the best that we can to ignore that, because that whenever we reprimand that pulls in negative attention. It takes away from the positive vibe in the classroom, but we're not telling them what to do instead. We're just telling them to stop tapping the pencil. So whenever we focus on the more positive things and we praise those positive behaviors, then we see the students tend to try and get more of that praise. So they, on their own, will stop the negative unwanted behavior and transform their behavior into the more positive, because they want to get that same level of praise and attention that their fellow students are getting. And so it's a mindset shift for many teachers, because we are hardwired to stop the bad thing. And so we're just trying to shift to recognizing the good things that are happening in our classrooms.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I appreciate both of, I didn't know that could happen that quickly. Praise itself in that short amount of time. That's like one unit. I'm just thinking of like one unit of instruction itself. That's incredible. And I would love the poster. Is there a list somewhere also of, we have the idea, it's the opposite of antisocial, helping those around them. But is there a list you guys have of prosocial behaviors specifically?
We do have one, and we had to cover some of those in the little poster that we have. We can send to you. Yeah.
And I think we could all infer. I just want to make sure, because us teachers are ones who like to have the answer right. So I can just see like, oh, okay, I can praise this. And that sense of humor is that part of, but like you said, sense of humor can go both ways. So in a distracting way and also a beneficial way. So just a list of those would be awesome as well. And then finally, for this pillar, how does it work with the others? Jenn, you had oh, perfect. Thank you, Katie. There is you mentioned it briefly, Jenn, about connecting with the teacher-student relationship pillar. How does it work with the other pillars? Praise specifically.
So praise specifically strengthens those teacher-student relationships, because kids want to hear the positive things that their teacher has to say about them. So that helps in that arena. It works with inductive discipline, because we're replacing the old carrot and stick, the reward and punishment systems, with praise and inductive discipline. And so instead of rewarding students constantly to get them to do the behavior that we're looking for, we're using praise in that instance. And so those two definitely work hand in hand. And then kind of also what I had mentioned with praise, really putting the focus on the prosocial behaviors and focusing on the positive things that we're seeing in the classroom, that's where we really see it enhancing that emotionally upbeat classroom. Because we're focusing more on positive, we're giving praise, we're instead of focusing on those heavy-handed reprimands that we see so often in classrooms. So praise, that all four pillars actually work really strongly together to create a prosocial classroom, and you can see praise is most certainly one that is intertwined with the other three very strongly.
Love it. Love it. Love it. And that's kind of our segue to start on the next one. But before we do that, I do need to ask you the age-old question that I ask every interview. What's your hashtag for praise? And it's not hashtag praise.
It might be hashtag I see your best self.
That's a good one. I'm going to go with hashtag you are ...
That's a good one.
That is a good one. I love it.
Samantha, I can give you a quote from one of our teachers too.
Oh, please.
She said, this is a direct quote, "I've been using student-centered praise in one of my tougher hours. They are now one of my best hours."
Aww. That makes me so happy. Because I remember that. It was always fourth block. It was always fourth block. But I bet if I would have had this, or I did praise, but I probably was one of those teachers that thought they praised and just praised like 4 kids and said, good job, not anything specific. So, oh man, if only. But that makes me happy. Thank you for bringing a teacher quote in. As someone who just listened, and I've heard this a little bit before in trainings, but hashtag shifts the focus for me as a teacher, for sure. Shifting that focus from especially like punitive, stop that behavior, to you are a kind person. So I really appreciate all of you going over everything for praise, and we will see you next time for inductive discipline.